Hello everyone. In this lesson I want to show you how easy Laravel makes it to add Markdown support to a piece of our content. If you've never heard of Markdown before, that's okay, but let's jump into the action and let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so when we try to create a new post, the title value is simple enough. That's just a single line worth of text. Quick test post. But the body content, this is a bit trickier because we would want to let our users have multiple paragraphs, right? Like you should be able to drop down. Also, maybe we want to let our users have subheadings or make a piece of text bold or italic, or let them have a bulleted or numbered list. However, we can't expect the average end user of our website to know HTML, right? Like if they want a bulleted list, we can't expect the average person to write content that looks like this, right? You and I are familiar with this because we're web developers, but the average visitor, this is not going to be an option. So there's this really popular syntax called Markdown. This is my favorite Markdown reference or documentation link, so you can find a link to this in the resources for this lesson. But essentially, Markdown makes it really easy to end up with HTML formatting without having to actually spell out HTML. So for example, if you wanted a heading level 1, you would just say one hashtag and then, my heading. If you wanted a heading level 3, it's, 3 hashtags, my heading. If you wanted a bulleted list, you could literally just do this, right? Just a dash. If you want to make something bold, you just wrap it in 2 asterisks. If you want to make it italic, you would just wrap it in 1 asterisk like this. Cool. So if you're not already familiar with Markdown, that's okay. Really, Markdown has nothing to do with Laravel. I just want to show you how easy Laravel makes it to add this type of feature to our app. If you do want to learn more about what you can do with the Markdown syntax, this is a great link to start with. But let's go ahead and go into our post controller and add Markdown support. Before we do that, let's actually create a brand new blog post so we'll know for sure when Markdown is working. So for the body content, let's say, I want this text to be bold. And then let's wrap this text in 2 asterisks like this. Now go ahead and save this. And now when you view this on your front end, we haven't added Markdown support yet. So obviously it's not actually bold. We just literally see the 2 asterisks. So now we have something to work towards. Let's go into our post controller for view single post, and let's add Markdown interpretation or support. So in VS Code, just jump into, controller command P, our post controller, and we're looking for the view single post function. In the body of our function, but before we return anything, I would do this. Let's make up a variable. You can name it anything just for fun. Let's name it, our HTML. And set that to equal, and then Laravel has this class called str, : to use a static method that belongs to a class, and the method we're interested in is simply Markdown. Let's end that with a semicolon. Now before we forget, we do need to import this class. So just right click on str and choose import class. There's a few different options. We're interested in the one that is illuminate support str. Perfect. So that should add a line like this. We can now actually use the class. Okay. Now, how does the Markdown function work? Whatever you pass it as an argument, it's going to interpret that as Markdown and then return a bit of HTML. So in other words, if we pass it this, it's going to recognize, hey, in Markdown, this should be wrapped in a strong or bold tag, and it's going to give us that appropriate HTML. So then that's what's going to live in our variable here. So let's just pass it what it would need. So $post, look inside our post object for the body item, the body property. Okay, now our desired HTML lives in this variable. So what I'm going to do is just overwrite the body value in our post variable, right? Because that's what we're passing into our blade template. So on a new line, for example, you could say $post, look inside the array for the item that has the label of body, and just set that to equal, $our HTML. Now, this doesn't actually need to be 2 lines of code like this. I just did this so it felt like we were only doing one thing at a time to make it simpler. But what you could do to save code is just take from the str to the end of this line, copy that, then you could delete this line, right? And just say that this should equal and then just paste in your clipboard. You only need one semicolon. Cool. So essentially, we're just overriding the body value and we're interpreting it as Markdown. Then that's going to get passed into our view. So you could save that. If you refresh, well, we see some good news and some bad news. So the good news is that that did interpret the 2 asterisks as a strong or bold tag. The bad news is that because Markdown gave us HTML, well, Blade is trying to protect us. Blade is really good at preventing malicious code from being output in your templates. So Blade is trying to say, hey, I'm escaping the value you gave me. I'm not going to let it get actually rendered as HTML. For example, if you view the source for this page, you can see that it's not literally the HTML tags. Blade, for our own safety, has converted that into, ampersand less than, and ampersand greater than, so on and so forth. So the browser's not going to actually dangerously interpret this as HTML. However, in this case, we do actually want to interpret this as HTML. So right now I want to show you how to do something, and I don't want you just doing this all over the place. You only want to do this when you really have a good reason to be doing it. But let's go into our Blade template. So that's singlepost.blade.php. And down here where we're outputting the body item, the body property, check this out. Instead of double curly brackets, just have single opening curly bracket, single closing curly bracket, and then after the opening, have 2 exclamations, and then right before the closing, have 2 exclamations like this. This is our way of telling the Blade engine, hey, you don't need to protect us, you do not need to escape this value, just literally render it as HTML. So you can save that. If you refresh, awesome. Now, like I said, I do not want you going around doing this all over the place in your templates. If you're not being very careful, this can be dangerous. Essentially, if there was malicious code in your database and then you're just outputting it without escaping it, well, that is a giant security vulnerability. Let me show you what I mean. So this has nothing to do with Markdown. I just want you to understand, escaping a value versus not escaping it. If you go into your database in the post table, and imagine for this new post, I directly edited the value in the database. And I added a script tag and a closing script tag. And in between I said, alert, hello. And then I clicked apply in the bottom right corner to actually make that change in the database. And then if you refresh, well, the Markdown interpreter is smart enough to not actually let this go through. But check this out. What if you went back into your post controller and then just commented out the Markdown line like this? If you refresh, you can see that that JavaScript actually got executed. Now, yes, it's just an innocent hello message, but if they can execute this, that means they can execute malicious JavaScript. So the point here is I just want you to be very careful, if we go back into our template, of when you use this feature. We're only using it here because we're already very safe. Remember, when we create a blog post, we were already stripping out any and all HTML tags, right? If you go into your post controller and remember our store new post function, we already were using strip tags, so there's no way that a user could even get malicious code into our database in the first place. So because we're being super careful like that, and we're also using the Markdown interpreter, it's okay, we're safe to not escape the content. Long story short, when you use the double curly brackets like that, Blade is protecting you. Blade will not let unescaped content get through. Cool, really quick, let me delete that malicious code from that post. Let me apply that. Let me go back into post controller. I do want to enable the Markdown line. Cool. We now have Markdown support. This is another reason why I love Laravel. If we were using Express and Node.js, we would have to go out to NPM and choose a Markdown package. But Laravel, it just has everything that we already need. It was that easy to add Markdown support to our content. Really quick, before we end this lesson, I do want to show you how you could allow certain elements in the resulting content, but disallow other elements. So for example, if I create a new post and say, my newest test, and then, I have a bit of body content. Hello, this is bold, and then a new paragraph. And then imagine I try to have a link, and then maybe below that, a heading level 3, hello, headline, and then maybe a bulleted list. If I go ahead and save this, Cool, we see it's bold, there's a link, there's a headline, a list. But what if you didn't want to allow your users to include links in their body content? Because yes, Markdown, the Markdown syntax allows you to have links, but maybe from a security standpoint, we don't want links. Well, let me show you what I would do. Back in Post Controller in View Single Post, I would just wrap this within strip tags and then only allow certain tags. Let me show you what I mean. So wrap this, so at the start of str, I would wrap that in strip tags, opening parentheses, close the parentheses right here at the end. Okay, now in strip tags, you give it 2 arguments. So this was the first argument in between the 2 closing parentheses, comma. The second argument, you just give it quotes, and now you can spell out the tags that are allowed. So essentially, the only tags that I would allow would be like a paragraph, an unordered list, maybe an ordered list, a list item, strong tag, the EM italic tag, maybe heading level 3, and maybe a line break. You don't have to use this exact combination, but this is just a quick example. Like I only want to allow these elements. Notice I'm not allowing the a link element. So you can save that. If you refresh, beautiful. We kept the bold, we kept the headline, we kept the bulleted list, but we did not let this be a link. Awesome. That is going to bring this lesson to a close. Looking ahead to our next lesson, we're going to learn how to only let logged in or authenticated users visit this create post screen, and especially only let logged in users actually submit this form. This should be fun to set up, so let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson.